Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. Do you want to join the international NARM community in support of trauma-informed care? If so, please consider joining us to become trained in the neuroaffective relational model. We are excited to offer 2 starting levels of professional trainings designed to support those of you working with clients or populations dealing with the effects of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma. The Level 1 Online NARM Basics Training is a psychoeducational training designed for helping professionals in a variety of fields, such as mental health professionals, substance abuse counselors, educators, doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, coaches, and more. The Level 2 NARM Therapist Training is a comprehensive clinical training designed for licensed mental health professionals, as well as current mental health graduate students and clinical interns and trainees. For more information on these NARM trainings and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. And now for our interview. Stefanie Klein is a NARM faculty trainer and has been teaching the NARM Online Basics Training, a Level 1 professional training that introduces the neuroaffective relational model for healing complex trauma. In today's episode, Stefanie shares more with us about OBT and her own learning experiences in that training. We are also excited to be bringing on new teachers for 2024 that will be taking over for Stefanie in teaching Level 1. Check out the narmtraining.com website for more information and updates. Stefanie is a licensed clinical social worker, NARM master therapist, and somatic experiencing practitioner who has spent 27 years in her Los Angeles private practice, specializing in treating adults with trauma and anxiety disorders. You can hear more from Stefanie in previous episodes 60 and 92, where she shares more of her experiences with NARM. Please enjoy this conversation with Stefanie Klein. All right, I'm sitting here with Stefanie Klein. We're so happy to have you back on the podcast, Stefanie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. It's good to be here.
Yeah. And today we get to talk about the Online Basics Training, OBT training. And so for folks that are unfamiliar with our NARM trainings, this is the Level 1. This is open to all kinds of folks. Maybe you can just quickly tell us who would be joining in this kind of a training, in the OBT training.
Yeah, this is a unique level of our training because it is open to a wide range of helping professionals. So I would say about half the people who end up enrolling in the OBT are mental health providers, so psychotherapists and counselors in different ways. And then the other half is made up of all different kinds of helping professionals, from educators to people who work in coaching, spiritual counseling, the medical community. So really anybody who is working with people who are impacted by complex trauma, which actually, if you think about it, is pretty much anybody.
Everyone.
Because we're all impacted by complex trauma.
Yep.
But we're really looking to invite in people who are working in some kind of a helping capacity. It makes it a really rich and interesting environment because there are so many different perspectives and voices coming in, and so many different professional settings that people are then bringing this information to.
Yeah. I love that about OBT. I love the diversity. Yeah. I love all the various, perspectives and points of view, and it makes the learning so rich. So
yeah.
I'm excited to talk about it today.
Yay.
And so we sort of dove in a little bit, but I wonder if you could tell us, what is it that you're hoping listeners would get out of our time together today, our conversation?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I feel like, part of the mission of the NARM Training Institute is to make the world a less traumatic place. And even though a lot of our focus and the other levels of our training is impacting by teaching our model to psychotherapists, I want to really highlight how much we care about the bigger picture and how much we believe that NARM has a significant role in impacting the lives of people who aren't accessing psychotherapy. And I'm hoping people will find it interesting to just hear about this kind of part of our mission. And this is one of the ways that we're trying to bring that into real action. And just the idea that somebody who works at a school or somebody who works in a clinic can be trauma informed in this NARM specific way and how that might impact the people that they interact with in every day and impact their workplaces is really inspiring. So I hope that people feel inspired by that and interested in that. And I also hope that some people out there might hear this and be like, oh, I didn't realize that I could maybe take an NARM training, or that I fit in here in some way, that I could benefit from this information, even if I'm not a mental health provider.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I hope this is okay to say. I guess we'll edit out if not. But I know at one point there was a dentist that went through. And that to me, I was like, oh, yeah, of course. Like there's folks who have had trauma there, even with dental work and that sort of thing. And she, like hearing her talk about how valuable the training was for her as a dentist, I was like, okay, this really applies to everyone, like literally everyone.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great example. I mean, dental work is very traumatizing to a lot of people. And even one of the examples that I use in teaching has to do with pediatric dentistry and how being trauma informed in some particular ways allows children to be more open to whatever intervention they have to have. So can you think about it in terms of like OBGYNs, people who are delivering babies? I mean, obviously teachers have such a hard job, and it's getting harder and harder all the time. So just thinking about how this information, OBT is a psychoeducational training. Because everybody has a different scope of practice, we're approaching the teaching through psychoeducation so that it can be broadly applicable. So just thinking about how somebody could bring this NARM information into the classroom. We've had executive coaches, people who are working in high-level business. Gosh, so many different professions. Yeah. It's an exciting and interesting place to be.
It is. And I just got chills when you were talking about the pediatric dentist, because I'm just thinking about how many kids, self-disclosure, I'm a mother. I've been there with my kid in the chair. And it's like, I've worried, oh my goodness, how is this going to play out? Like, are they going to be worried, to come to the dentist for years to come? I mean, I really have thought about that.
My 20, almost 21-year-old is still so terrified to go to the dentist that she has not gone in. I'm admitting my bad mothering right now, but she's an adult. I can't force her to do much, but she hasn't gone to the dentist in 2.5 years. And she's finally going because her tooth hurts and the pain is getting worse. So she has to go and get it dealt with. But again, the more people out there that are trauma informed, and I just want to say that, like, our world is tough right now. I mean, it's traumatic sometimes to just go to a sports event, to be on an airplane. Like, so just the more we're all trauma informed, the better.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and maybe we should talk about your role in the OBT.
Sure. I'm the trainer for the OBT, which just is the word we use in our community for I teach the class. And so, I teach the class. I invite in some guests. So Brad Kammer, who is the senior trainer at the NARM Training Institute, senior faculty, he comes in and does a little guest teaching. And Larry's been coming in since we started the OBT and meeting everybody and doing a little bit of guest teaching, but I'm primarily teaching the class.
Okay, great. You're guiding the students. And so in that process, you have like some Q&A time. I mean, you obviously have like instruction time. You have some breakout time where they're in smaller groups. So what are you hearing coming back from the students of like with some of the topics that are really impactful or that really stand out?
Well, like you brought in something else that I want to comment on first, if it's okay. It's just I'd like to tell people just a little bit about the structure of the class, because like all of our NARM trainings, our classes are highly experiential. So we spend about half the time with didactic learning, like with me teaching a topic, and that means like I'm talking. And then we spend half the time doing experiential learning. And we do that a lot by breaking up into these, as you know, you know this, but I'm telling everybody else out there, we break out into triads and dyads. So you get to be in a small group format. So you're with another person or two other people. And we support people through these prompts that we give to really get to know these topics from the inside out, like to really think about themselves in terms of these topics that I'm about to talk about. Because a big part of the NARM approach is how we know our own internal worlds. And one of the ways that we do experiential learning is through triads and dyads, which people consistently say they love. They can be nerve-wracking sometimes to get in a Zoom room with a stranger and talk about an intimate topic. But then on the other side of them, people just feel so heartful and seen, and they get great self-understanding, which then, of course, helps them be more effective in understanding other people's experience. And then we also break out into small groups with training assistants. And you've been a training assistant at the OBT before, so you're familiar with this role. So we have some facilitated conversations as well. So I just wanted to say that first so people kind of understand the lay of the land of this class, that it isn't just sitting and listening to topics. It's very experiential. And then Q&A, we spend time with people, getting to unpack some of these topics and ask questions and engaging as a whole cohort, which is always really interesting. Okay, so having said all of that, your question about the topics that stand out. I mean, we cover so many topics in the OBT. We basically cover everything topic-wise that we cover in our level 2 trainings in terms of the content. We just cover it in a more broadly applicable psychoeducational way instead of focusing on the clinical skills aspect. So I would say I want to start with just talking about connection. The theme of connection for human beings is such a huge life theme. I mean, connection as this life-giving drive for people that also, because we run into environmental failure, meaning we run into places where our core needs aren't met, and then we can become very threatened by connection. So most human beings use disconnection from themselves and from others as a way of protecting themselves from not getting their needs met. So we walk around as human beings with a lot of inner conflict around this theme of connection. So what we say in NARM, what Larry has helped us understand through creating this model, and what the original title of the first book about NARM was, is that connection is our deepest desire and our greatest fear. So one of the places we start in the online basics training is talking about this very important life theme of connection and the ambivalence and inner conflict that people often feel, since disconnection is such a life-saving strategy for people. And that is usually very impactful for people to start to really understand, both for their clients and for themselves. Do you want me to keep going with topics?
Yeah, well, I'm just, even just there, it's like I want to take a breath because I'm thinking of my first training, and it's been years now, but I remember being in a dyad talking about connection, and I was surprised just how much emotion was coming up for me. I didn't realize that I had this relationship to connection and disconnection. And I saw myself as a helper. I had been working in the field for a little while, and I was bowled over by how much I was impacted by one conversation with one person on a topic that I thought I was familiar with. So anyway, that was what was coming up for me as you were talking about. I was like, it's so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool for you to reflect on your experiences in dyads and triads. Yeah. Because I can talk about it like, oh, this is what we do and this is how it impacts people. But you can really get in there and say, I remember this.
Yeah. And I remember feeling a little terrified to talk about it. I was like, why am I so afraid right now? But as I talked about it and opened up to it and softened into it, it's been so impactful. And I continue to work with that.
Yeah. And I don't know if this was your experience or not, but one of the things we do after people, they'll be in a triad or a dyad for, let's say, 25 minutes. They aren't 2 hours long or anything, but then talking about some of these really important themes. And then when they come out, we invite people to just share, just a short phrase or even a word about how they were impacted. And one of the things that I find really comes out of this kind of experiential learning is that people keep recognizing how universal some of these themes are. Though we all have specific different ways that we relate to the themes that are very unique to us, but that there's so much recognition of these underlying universal themes, and that is very connecting. Yeah. I don't know if that was your experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because I could connect with my dyad partner. There were so many things that we had in common. And then also what you're naming is there was part of it that felt really unique to me. And that was, there's a sweetness there.
Yeah, that both can be true.
Yeah.
That we can have this shared humanity that we
Mhm.
keep seeing. Oh my gosh, like there are so many ways that as human beings we can relate to each other. And then we can also have our differences, very, very big differences
Mhm.
sometimes. And there's room for both.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. So I think another really impactful topic in NARM that we, of course, cover in the online basics training is how we look at shame from a NARM perspective.
Mhm.
You know, shame, people use the word guilt and shame sometimes interchangeably, but in NARM, we talk about shame-based identifications, like the way we really identify ourselves through toxic shame. And, you know, that all relates to how we blame ourselves for the failures in our environment as a survival strategy.
Mhm.
So shame is so painful for human beings. I mean, you
Mhm.
feel it, I feel it, we all feel it.
Mhm.
Toxic shame
Yeah.
is so painful. And yet, you know, in NARM, we really see its survival value and how it saved us from, you know, having to grow up and feel like, I guess the best way to say it is that if we feel bad, we are bad when we're children.
Right.
Like that's how we make sense of it. And this is so helpful to our survival because if we were able to really see accurately when we were very young that the problem is in our environment or that maybe our parents aren't equipped to really take care of us, that would be too terrifying, unbearable, overwhelming. So it's actually more helpful to blame ourselves
Yeah.
until we are older and have
Right.
some agency. So
Agency.
the way we sort of support people in understanding shame from this perspective and then understanding from there how to support people to potentially disidentify from some of this deeply rooted toxic shame seems to be very, very powerful and useful for people, both personally and professionally. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to be really clear that the online basics training is definitely a professional training. It's not a personal growth
Mhm.
training,
Right.
but there's no way that you can learn NARM without, as a
Personal.
side dish,
Yeah.
as a side effect, without growing personally. So, yeah, so
Absolutely.
these topics are just as impactful, I think, for people personally as they
Yeah.
are professionally.
I also really appreciated that you differentiate, and in NARM we differentiate. There's a toxic shame,
Yeah.
and then you talk about the disidentification. So I know you dive into that in the training, but I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that, like the difference.
Between toxic shame and healthy shame?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people can use these terms interchangeably, healthy shame or healthy guilt, you know, that feeling that we get when we hurt somebody, when we cross a boundary in society, when we do something and it represents maybe not our values or you know there's a way that we then feel inside that motivates us to try to repair because we can resonate through empathy with what this other person may be feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't feel good and it motivates us to repair. And that is what we in NARM look at as healthy shame.
Yeah.
And it's really a part of all societies. It's a part of like kind of like these are kind of the rules of belonging. And we get into territory as human beings where we might overstep those rules and want to get back to repair if we can. And that's very different than this kind of toxic shame, which is a core belief, a core sense that we are defective, bad, faulty, unworthy. So it's sort of, you can look at it as the difference between I am bad versus I did something that
Right.
negatively impacted somebody that I don't feel good about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciate how the model holds that and how you teach that. And
Yeah.
I know that that's a really impactful differentiation there that I've heard from students.
Yeah. There's so many more topics that I can name right now, but
Yeah.
I'm curious, having had your own experience with NARM and the OBT, like what's a standout topic for you?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the two that you've named, connection and the idea of toxic guilt and or shame. And I think probably another one that jumps out at me is, let me think about this. I know the adaptive survival styles, I still am learning. It's like there's so many layers to the adaptive survival styles. So that's probably something that I would name.
So just for people who are totally unfamiliar, like you want to say a little bit about the
Well,
adaptive
maybe
survival styles?
there are so many layers. I'm like,
Right.
maybe Stefanie should talk about it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Who's interviewing who? Yeah. I mean, the adaptive survival styles are another topic that we teach in NARM, and they sort of provide a background, like of understanding developmental trauma, and their adaptations, basically, how Larry, Dr. Heller, adapted Wilhelm Reich's original character structure model, which was a developmental map that Reich created to understand how people are impacted at various critical stages of development by things that happen in their life. And so over the years, this map has evolved, it's been changed and renamed. And Larry, as part of that evolutionary process, really wanted to rename. He kept the stages intact, but he wanted to really rename it and to depathologize childhood trauma, and to really focus on like what happens at these different critical stages of development when the core need at that stage is not met adequately. And then like what happens for children, so that it's not about pathology. Reich's original character structure styles were very pathologizing. So we do learn about these different stages of development, what the core needs are, and what happens and how children, babies, children, humans adapt when those needs aren't met. And there are some very specific, interesting ways that people adapt at these different stages of development. And there are also some very specific shame-based identifications, like ways that people come to relate to themselves through toxic shame at these different stages of development. So yeah, we cover that, and it provides a really nice background for understanding some of the themes that our clients or the people we work with come in and are dealing with and talking about.
I'm glad I'm interviewing you because you said that very succinctly. I probably would have said too many words, but
I was like, I'm going on too long about this.
No, that's perfect. I love that.
So you find that topic very interesting.
I found it explained a lot for me about how I had oriented myself in the world, and just kind of helped me explore some questions that I had and understand myself better. And so for me, that was really, really impactful. And at first, I was relating to myself with a lot of shame around. I was shaming myself around how I identified myself. And one of the things about the survival styles is that it's not like we're putting people in boxes and saying this is. And so I felt like that was a really tender learning for me, learning about it without putting myself in a box, but just understanding more about myself.
One of the things we say in NARM is that most of us are going to relate to all the survival styles, and that we might find, or we tend to find, that we specialize in one or two, which is really kind of an indication of when and how we may have been impacted by whatever chronic misattunements, environmental failures happened in our lives. And so another thing we say in NARM, like you said, we don't put people in boxes. We don't work with survival styles. We work with human beings who relate to these certain survival style themes. So again, the movement is away from pathologizing, from categorizing people, from labeling, diagnosing, and more to just looking at this bigger picture of how people are impacted and then how they brilliantly adapt.
Yeah.
And that in NARM, we hold those adaptations as really sacred rather than as pathology.
Yeah. And I think because I've learned to hold myself around it tenderly in that way, it makes it so much easier for me to work with clients in a tender, gentle way. And that's kind of the feedback that I get, is like, I've never felt so not judged, that someone can see me and see what I'm working with and working through, and that I don't feel judgment. And that just, that feels invaluable to me. It's so priceless.
Well, that kind of makes me think of two other topics that we talk about in this training. And the first one that came to mind was heartfulness, that like we actually talk about the kind of heartfulness that is inherent in this approach. And we look at heartfulness as sort of the NARM version of mindfulness, that, it's like an embodied mindfulness that is not just cognitive, but is really about how we are bringing love back into the healing conversation. And, when you were talking about people giving you that feedback that they don't feel judged, that they feel accepted, I felt that heartfulness, that this approach allows people to reconnect to their hearts. And our hearts are a big part of what we have to shut down and disconnect from as part of the adaptations to early trauma. And the other thing it made me think about is a topic that a lot of people really respond to in this training, which is the way we talk about burnout. I think it's in module 2 that we hit this topic of burnout. And we have a very specific way of looking at burnout in NARM. And, we really look at it through a lot of agency, meaning we look at the ways that we, as helping professionals and our clients in whatever work they do, are burning ourselves out, are not able to listen to ourselves and connect to ourselves, and are instead overriding what's real for us and burning ourselves out. So we're really looking in NARM at our internal responses and reactions to external challenges. And a lot of that is rooted in these early adaptations to trauma, where we just had to do and we just had to keep going. And we just had to not listen to ourselves and our bodies in order to make it through. So what was brilliant back then leads to people, getting sick and having to leave their professions and having to go on disability and all these other things. And, helping professions are very high burnout careers. I think in the last OBT, we had a couple of people who took the training because they were on the brink of saying, I can't do this anymore. And this topic of burnout really changed their course. And they were like, not only can I do this, I want to do it, but I want to do it differently. So big, important topic that we teach.
Beautiful. Any others that are coming up for you? There's so much. It's such
There's
a
so
rich
many.
training.
I mean, the way we talk about self-agency in NARM and the way we teach that in the OBT is very, very, very impactful for people. The topic of self-sabotage and just really understanding why self-sabotage is such a huge theme for people, why we both want to move forward in our lives, but we also feel very threatened often at the idea of moving forward or at the actual movement. So there's so many really important topics. And again, I might be repeating myself, but like what I love, what feels very inspiring to me teaching this is the fact that people are learning it in this very personal way, where the deepest aspect of the learning has to do with how they're relating to these topics for themselves. And so, yes, they go back to their workplaces and it helps their clients, and their clients then bring it home and it helps their families and friends. And there's this ripple effect. But at the same time, just seeing human beings' lives change in real time by the material is just so rewarding.
So cool.
I'm sure you've seen that as being a TA in there.
Oh, I love it. I love it, love it, love it. I'll name a few more. We don't have to dive into them, but just in case listeners are like, their interest is piqued, we'll just drop a few more carrots out. We talk about post-traumatic growth and the disidentification post-traumatic growth. We talk about trauma's impact on the body. You touch on that. You talk about intergenerational trauma, right?
Oh, that's a huge one.
That's a huge one, right?
Huge one. We talk about intergenerational trauma and cultural trauma and cultural misattunement from an NARM perspective. Huge, important topic. And one that often people aren't really connecting to through the lens, of, this goes way back. This goes many generations back, Yeah. And cultural attunement is such a huge topic, and cultural misattunement is such a huge topic in helping professions. So we spend a good amount of time in module 4. Yeah, 4.
Yeah, you even bring in polyvagal theory when we're talking about the trauma's impact on the body. Also, what was the other one that I was thinking of? Oh, you talk about complex trauma and the relational intimacy dynamics.
Yeah, we do.
That is a really valuable one.
And family dynamics. So we try to hit a lot of topics. And then because we're in this mixed professional environment where everybody has different scopes of practice, through our case consult process, we support people in how can I take this knowledge and apply it in my specific setting or with my specific clientele.
Yeah.
Because how you're going to take some of this and use it in pediatric dentistry, for instance, versus how you're going to use it, in an agency for, sex trafficked women is going to be very different.
Yeah.
And so we provide these monthly case consultations for people to bring in their more specific settings and get some help sort of thinking through application.
Which I love. And again, I love the diversity. And even though there are maybe very different ways the different professions, might hold this information and kind of apply it, I also have seen moments where people from two very different fields will be like, oh, I love how you're talking about that over there. That actually could inform, that kind of shifts maybe how I'm thinking about it over here and how valuable, the varying perspectives are, and that we can sort of, I don't know, cross-pollinate, is that a word?
Yes.
But like learn from each other in that way. I just find that so valuable. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know through education that the diversity of an environment supports the richness of the learning, and that, this is a very professionally diverse environment in that way. Yeah. And so having people in triads and dyads with people that aren't in their exact profession and don't necessarily speak their exact professional lingo leads to really, really rich learning.
Well, is there anything else? I want to be respectful of your time, but we're here talking about OBT and inviting others to join in.
Yeah, I welcome anybody who is interested in learning more about NARM, and anybody who's interested in making the world a less traumatic place. And just, I think I stole that from Brad at some point. And it feels like a tagline, it feels like that's what we're doing. And I welcome anybody to go to the website and read more about it. I do a monthly NARM intro that people can sign up for. It's free. It's an hour and a half intro webinar. If they want to hear more about NARM, they can sign up for that. And come be a part of this. It's a weekend at once a month for 4 months. So you get this intense dose, and then you have a little time to integrate and decompress. And then we go further and further and further. And please reach out to the Institute if you have any questions.
Okay, 3 things are coming up for me. Sorry, I have a list.
Sure, good.
First, I want to say that intro webinar is so rich. It's an intro webinar, but there's so much to learn there. So even if you're thinking you're not interested in OBT, I'm going to encourage you to go to Stefanie's intro webinar, because I feel like there's so much there. I know the first time I heard it, I was like, I need more of this. Wow, this is already shifting how I'm thinking about things. So there's that.
Thanks, Emily.
Also, it is a good deal. Can I just say, for the price, for what you're getting in the OBT, does that sound too salesy? What I know of other trainings, and there's lots of great trainings out there, but the amount of time and what you're getting and the experiential nature of it, that it's not just a webinar that you buy and you have sitting on your computer and you never watch it again. Because let's be honest, I think that's how a lot of trainings are.
It's a live class for 3 days.
It's a live class. It's engaging. I just want to say this, for what you're getting, the price it's a good deal. So just want to say that. But then lastly, I wanted to finish, if it's okay with you, because you've been doing this. What is this? Have you been doing it for 2.5 years? I feel like it started right after COVID.
We started during COVID. Yeah. So we started in 2020. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if this is my 7th
round.
We're right around there round of the OBT. Yeah.
And it's evolved.
We keep learning as we go. Yeah.
It's really evolved. So I wonder if I could ask you, what have you learned, or what has been really impactful for you in this training?
Oh, man. I mean, I've learned so much about myself, being in the teaching role. NARM is one of those models that, as you know, I'm sure that there's always more to learn. So what's so fascinating to me is that every single solitary time I teach the same material, I learn something. I understand something more deeply. Something becomes more clear to me, which is just a magnificent thing about a depth-oriented approach like NARM. There's just no end. And it's also pretty interesting is sometimes I will start to feel like I don't understand something that I've understood for 10 years. And then I'll be like, oh, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like part of that evolution of dropping to a deeper level of understanding that I'll hit this place and I'm like, wait, do I understand this? And then I'll more deeply understand it. And I get this feedback from my TAs all the time where they'll be like, I've been a TA at like 10 NARM trainings and I just got something like in a way that I've never understood it before. So yeah, I mean, I think that's my big takeaway is that there's no end to learning about trauma, learning about NARM, learning about ourselves through this approach. And that just keeps it really exciting. And there's no end to healing, really. It's our life's work. There's no finish line. There's nowhere we have to get.
What a beautiful place to finish. That's a great.
Right. I'm going to go do a group case consult now for NARM. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Stefanie. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share with us and our listeners.
Thanks, Emily. It's always good to hang out with you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so listeners, you can go, I'm sure we'll have in the show notes more information about the OBT training and hope to see you in a training soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. Are you working with clients or populations dealing with the effects of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma? If so, we invite you to consider joining us to become trained in the neuroaffective relational model in support of trauma-informed care. We are excited to offer psychoeducational and clinical trainings for a variety of mental health professionals. For more information on these NARM trainings and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.